It is my pleasure to welcome everybody to North Carolina Humanities 2022 Route 1 Reads Songbirds and Stray Dogs Book Conversation event. To get us started, I would like to introduce Sherry Paula Watkins, the Executive Director of North Carolina Humanities, to make some opening remarks. Sherry Paula.
Hello, everyone. As the Executive Director of North Carolina Humanities, it is my pleasure to welcome you here. I am Sherry Paula Watkins, and welcome to this evening's virtual book event. With many other choices to spend your time, I thank you for choosing this event and for joining us at this year's Route 1 Reads virtual book discussion. Route 1 Reads is a reading list that explores various genres and illuminates important aspects of North Carolina. As a statewide nonprofit and as North Carolina's affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, which has a humanities council in each state and jurisdiction, our mission is to connect North Carolinians with cultural experiences that spur dialogue, deepen human connections, and inspire community. This evening features a moderated panel discussion on Songbirds and Stray Dogs, our 2022 Route 1 Reads literary fiction selection. Please note, any views, findings, conclusions, opinions, or recommendations expressed by our partners and participants do not necessarily represent those of North Carolina Humanities or the National Endowment for the Humanities. We would like to recognize Bookmarks, a sponsor of this event. It is my pleasure now to introduce Jamie Rogers Southern, a friend of North Carolina Humanities and the Executive Director of Bookmarks, a literary arts nonprofit and independent bookstore in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Jamie.
Thank you, Sherry Paula. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Bookmarks is a literary arts nonprofit that cultivates community by bringing people of all ages together with books and authors that educate, inspire, challenge, and entertain. We work very hard throughout the year to provide programming of all kinds in our nonprofit independent bookstore, which is located in downtown Winston-Salem. We recently celebrated our 5th anniversary this July of the bookstore, and we will be celebrating our 17th anniversary this September 22nd through 26th of our annual book festival. Our book festival is the largest annual book festival in the Carolinas. We brought 20,000 people in 2019 prior to the pandemic. We're hoping that this year we can bring people together once again in celebration of books and stories. We're very happy to be a sponsor of tonight's event for that reason. We really love any opportunity to gather people together to talk about books and the power that stories have to connect us. So thank you, North Carolina Humanities, for inviting us to participate.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you to Bookmarks. I'll now turn it over to Melissa Giblin, Director of the North Carolina Center for the Book at the North Carolina Humanities, to finish introductions and begin tonight's program. Melissa?
Thank you, Sherry Paula. It is our pleasure to welcome Kathy Neal White as this evening's moderator. Kathy Neal White of Roanoke Rapids is a North Carolina Humanities Board Trustee and serves as chair of the Program Impact Committee. She's a graduate of West Hampton College, the University of Richmond, and also received her master's degree from UNC Chapel Hill. She taught history and English for 30 years and served as a senior master fellow with the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History in New York from 2003 until her retirement in 2020. We would also like to welcome Megan Lucas and Ron Rash as our panelists. Before we begin, we will briefly discuss a few housekeeping points for this evening's event and practice how to engage with us. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available after the live session if you would like to visit our website and YouTube page to rewatch this event. We'd love to hear from you during today's event. If you have a question, please send it through the Q&A tab or through the chat. Closed caption is available by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to share your experience on social media by tagging @NC Humanities on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It is my pleasure to turn the event over to Kathy to introduce this evening's panelists.
Thank you, Melissa, so much, and for all the logistics that you have planned and coordinated, and we particularly appreciate the two panelists who are with us tonight. The author, Megan Lucas, of course, is the author of the novel Songbirds and Stray Dogs and the forthcoming collection Here in the Dark. Megan teaches creative writing at Asheville Buncombe Technical Community College. She is the Roger Gillen visiting writer at Robert Morris University and is editor-in-chief of Reckon magazine. She's a busy person and she lives in Flat Rock, North Carolina. Ron Rash is the author of 19 books, including Serena and Burning Bright. He is a two-time recipient of the O. Henry Prize, as well as many other awards and prestigious nominations. He teaches at Western Carolina University. So what a duo we have tonight, and we're really looking forward to hearing from both of you. I'm going to ask a few questions of the two panelists, and each of them will give an answer and maybe a conversation back and forth on each question. So we're really looking forward to hearing from both of you. Let's start out by talking about the literature, specifically literary fiction, and how that reflects life in Appalachia. So you both have your local experts and literary experts. So tell us, how does the literature reflect life there?
You want me to go first, Ron?
Sure.
Okay. Well, first, I'm kind of uncomfortable speaking to life in Appalachia in general, because we're such a huge geographic region. I'm more comfortable saying Southern Appalachia, and even then, I'm well aware that my white, female, cishet, middle class, English speaking immigrant experience is widely different from even my closest neighbors. So I think it's important to express that my Appalachian experience might not be yours, but that doesn't mean either of them is wrong. But that we need to have this conversation to show the rich diversity within the region. I also wouldn't want to limit it to just Appalachia, but I think that literary fiction reflects life maybe better, real life better than some other genres, because life doesn't have a plot and not a tidy ending. It's more about relationships, and I think that we can see that in literary fiction maybe better than crime fiction or sci-fi or romance certainly. But that said, I didn't set out to write a book that reflected life in Appalachia. I'm a storyteller, and I just set out to write a good story. And I wanted the reader to care about the characters. And so I wrote about people that I know, because I wanted the reader to connect with them deeply. And I guess secondary to that would be that if they don't know these people, that they should know these people. And that readers feel like Songbirds reflects real life is a real point of pride for me. I'm really proud when I see comments that I've captured real life on paper. So that's a really long answer to say that I do think that literary fiction does a good job of reflecting real life, if you add a whole bunch of caveats about making generalizations about Appalachia.
Well, I think that's what the best writing from the region has always done. While it's certainly evokes the culture, if it really works, it also has to make a connection with readers outside the region as far as human connections. Eudora Welty, a quote I've quoted a lot, that it really inspires me, is that one place understood helps us understand all other places better. And for me, the region has been so important for my family, since my family's been here since the 1700s. And that history is very personal to me. But I think there's a difference between local color and regional writing. Local color is more where you're looking for what's odd about the place, what makes it maybe distinctive, and sometimes that can really lend easily to stereotypes, I think. But I think a regional writer is always searching for the the universal within the particular place. So that's the way I approach it.
Okay, thank you both so much. And you're welcome to go back and forth. So if Megan, if you have anything you want to add to that, you're welcome to do that.
No, I love that local color versus regional writing. Since I was born and raised in Canada, and I'm an immigrant and a adopted Appalachian, I work really hard to be really careful about stereotype. Because as sort of an outsider who's been accepted, I don't want to make light of that or try to I guess make a spectacle out of Southern Appalachia, or out of the people that I love and live with. So I really like that sort of local color versus regional writing. I think that's a great way to explain it.
And I would say in your book, one thing that really impressed me, speaking of Megan's book now, is that you didn't do that. I mean, you really, you didn't condescend to your characters. And I think a lot of it comes down to that. But you also, there's always a danger, though, you can go the other way. Make the characters too noble, too perfect, just long-suffering, mere victims. And that's another way of denying humanity, because you're not showing them people are complex, and they're not cardboard figures of good and bad. And your book certainly showed that.
Thank you.
And in a related question, what is the broader context of the setting? For example, what was going on in Western North Carolina during the 1980s? And why was it important to set the book during this time period? Megan, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, I totally honest. Dr. Edward Karshner wrote and presented a paper on songbirds at last year's Appalachian Studies Conference. And by reading it, I became aware of theories about time in Appalachian literature that I was not consciously aware of previously. I guess I just knew it in my gut, that it can seem that Appalachians have sort of an obsession with the past, I suppose. But that's really more because we have this different understanding of time, and it's not linear, but cyclical. And that we look back, but we don't wallow, but we use the momentum of history to sort of push us forward with purpose. It's a really fascinating paper, and I don't pretend to understand it entirely, but it shows how the characterization of Jolene and Chuck and Rachel fit into like all of these different ways of understanding and interpreting Appalachian perspectives of the past. All of that is to say that I'm aware that there are theories about why so many Appalachian books are set in the past, and I'm sure that Ron can speak more to that because of his expertise. But I can just tell you that that Songbirds was set in 1982 for two very unsexy and unacademic reasons. And the first of which is that I was born in 1982. And I wanted a personal connection with the characters. I liked thinking about Jolene's journey as being sort of a comparison to my mother's. And because I have future plans to write books in this universe, I really liked that Charlie is the same age as me in real life. I also did not want to write a boring book. I wanted there to be a lot of tension, and sometimes tension can be created from one character's ignorance of what's happening with other people, from being cut off from the rest of the world. And I think this is much harder to write in our culture of cell phones and Wi-Fi. For example, I think it's way more interesting and emotional to watch Jolene drag that suitcase through the streets of Beaufort looking for somewhere to stay than it is for her to just Google it. And so, I really wanted to sort of write a book without that technology. I also think that the rest of the world doesn't quite understand, even now, that here in the mountains, our technological infrastructure stinks. Cell service in the mountains sucks. A lot of people who live here only have access to satellite internet, which is terrible and terribly expensive and spotty at best. And so this all makes me sound so lazy, but it's just easier to set a book in the 80s than it was to try to explain contemporary mountain technology as well. So there was just sort of like all of these, I guess, personal, not very interesting reasons to set it in 1982, but that's what I did.
Thank you for your honesty. That's
Well, my project I didn't really start thinking this way, but as I'd written a few books, I started to realize that I was going through different periods, and I became more conscious. I wanted to look at the Appalachian, or at least the region I knew in Western North Carolina, through time in a way, and particularly what I considered crucial, or historians would say too, crucial moments. And for instance, 1918, one book was set, The Cove; 1930s, Serena; 1950s, One Foot in Eden; 1970s, another book, 1990s, Saints at the River; World Made Straight in the 70s. But then some contemporary stories too, and actually a contemporary novel, The Risen, my last book, but also stretching back. And I just thought that was an interesting project. Robert Morgan has done a lot of that, and Lee Smith too. It's not, this is nothing original. I think their work echoes, but seeing the differences, the connections, the region, how the region reacts to certain outside influences, what's lost, what's retained. And it's been, as I say, it became a project to really try to hit those points. And that's kind of where I am right now. I think I've hit the major ones already. So I may go back and probably set another book in just maybe another time period. But that was kind of what I had in mind. And also, I think people love to read about other times. Megan kind of started, when she started conversation, you talk about how you're giving a kind of human face to these people and the place, and I think you're trying to do that with the time. I think that's the difference maybe between literature and historians, is that historians are more on the facts, and I think writers are trying to get into that sense of what would it feel like to be there, and of course that's an imaginative act, but I think that's the part of what makes it amazing. I love Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall, which is about Henry VIII, and I absolutely believe those characters. And to me, they're more real than anything I could read in a history book. But and also, I'm a little skeptical of history. It's always an interpretation too.
Thank you so much. That's great insight for particularly those of us who are not authors, but appreciate and enjoy so much what you all do in those stories. So let's go on with somewhat of one of the things, Megan, that I enjoyed the most and thought was you did so beautifully, and that is that of course you told the story from the perspective of more than one character. And how are multiple voices important to the telling of stories?
Well, I think that they give stories balance and depth when you can tell it from multiple perspectives. The first draft of Songbirds was just Jolene's perspective, and it felt like something was wrong, like I was missing something. Firstly, Jolene's self-perception isn't exactly accurate, so I thought it would be helpful to be able to see her through someone else's maybe more forgiving, maybe more accurate perspective. So I think that giving that sort of second point of view gives her characterization some balance. but also like Chuck is really important to Jolene's journey, especially at the climax of the story. And I don't want to ruin it for anyone, but he's very important, and the reader being attached to him is very important. And so I think that allowing the reader in Chuck's head and allowing them to see what his thoughts and hopes and dreams and fears are allows the reader to kind of get attached to Chuck in a way that they wouldn't have if he didn't get to speak for himself. I also think that there's a tension between the desires and expectations of those two characters. And that's very much at the heart of the story. And without being able to see in both of their heads, I don't think that you would get to that point. But I also just really like stories that are told from multiple perspectives. I'm rereading Serena right now, and I'm loving that, getting to see that story from all these different sides too. And so Ron does that beautifully.
Well, I think if I can add just a little bit with that is I think in a way, and I suspect this in some ways happened to you, it's very often the characters decide how the story's going to be told and who needs to step up and have a voice in it. When I wrote my first published novel, One Foot to Eden, I'd planned to write just from a single point of view, and it was almost as if a character was elbowing me, actually the wife, and saying, you heard this guy's side, his side of this. And I think that's one thing I've learned is that a lot of times for me, when I'm writing and it's not working, a lot of times it's I'm not listening to those voices, or I'm trying to fight them. When I wrote Saints at the River, I wrote about 40 pages from the point of view of an outsider in the region, a man who'd come to write a story about it. And then it was just dead on the page. And I finally realized, well, this is Maggie's story. It was the woman who had grown up there. And it wasn't so much, it was just a sense of working and starting to realize that. And then I switched it completely, and she became the voice, the only voice. So I think each book has its own, and each group of characters, they all have their demands.
Anything to add, Megan? You're welcome to or not.
Oh, no, no, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, I couldn't tell. While we're also talking so much about themes and novels that are set in Appalachia, they all often deal with much grittier themes, crime and violence. But there also seem to be recurring themes in the same way of resiliency and redemption. Is there something about Appalachia that lends itself to writing about these themes on both sides of that picture, the grittier themes, but also the redemption and resiliency?
Well, I think that this kind of goes a little bit back to what I was talking about, Dr. Karsner's assertion about the sort of cyclical nature of Appalachian storytelling, and that there's no endings, there's only new beginnings. And so that ties very closely to the idea of resiliency and redemption and renewal. But to say that I knew any of that when I was writing Songbirds is to give myself way too much credit. But when I first started writing, I was looking at the writers that I love, Ron and David Joy and Wiley Cash and the writers from this region, and so many of them were male. And so I saw this little space for myself on the shelf, because my writing isn't as gritty, and maybe focuses on slightly more feminine themes. But Songbirds and Stray Dogs is about things that haunt me and things that give me hope. This spring, I was so lucky that I attended the Looking Glass Writers Conference and was able to study under Crystal Wilkinson, who is just a treasure. And she encouraged us to really use our haunts to deepen our work. And it was exciting to discover that I was already doing that, the one thing I was doing right already. And so I'm haunted by women's bodies and how we are used by society, how we have to be useful some way, either sexually or through motherhood or through the labor of our bodies, in order for us to have value. I'm haunted by the hypocrisy of organized religion and by our society's lack of infrastructure to protect the weakest of us. But I'm also just astounded by the resiliency of women and our ability to just bear these terrible burdens and make the best of bad situations. And I'm also kind of obsessed with the idea that family is something that you can make, not necessarily something that you're born into. And those things give me hope. And so I get what you're saying, that this book is maybe a little less gritty than some of the others that come out of the region. And I think part of that is because I'm female, and part of that is that I'm just kind of obsessed with different things than some of my fellow writers.
But the resiliency is really strong.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, well, for me, the region, Appalachia's a region in the United States that traditionally, I mean, has, well, and this pretty much continues, not in all places, but more's been taken from it than given to it. I think that's pretty obvious, whether it's coal, trees, military. And I just know from my family's experiences in the mountains, particularly, you know, my grandparents' lives, what they were like, and my parents, who actually were able to become middle class really after growing up in poverty. That resilience, it really is there. Certain, at least what I saw with my relatives, a stoicism, and also, and this is sometimes I think a more disturbing aspect. I'm fascinated with how landscape affects character. And I think that mountains can make people have an intense sense of home, you know, being protected, but also it can work the other way. And you're always reminded of how insignificant you are. I mean, particularly if you've been growing up in traditional Appalachian communities where the houses would not be on top because these weren't millionaires. But you see with that, you know, they endure and they do the best they can. But there's also this darkness. My family, my grandmother was so fatalistic. My mother has that. I fight it, and there's something about that, and that's a dangerous thing because I think sometimes that will allow people to stay in situations where perhaps an awareness of political action, just being resigned to it. Sometimes that's not necessarily a good thing as well. But I think, you know, and I think as an artist, I want to try to cross, you know, to do my best to be true to everyone in the region. And, you know, Megan, actually, I thought you did a really good job with Chuck.
Oh,
I found him completely believable. And I think that's where, as writers, we try to transcend whatever limitations we have.
I love what Ron was saying about sort of that family connection and the landscape. One of the things that, you know, I get asked a lot is how do I write this region when I didn't grow up here? And I like to kind of draw attention to the similarities between the rural communities in northern Canada and sort of the rural communities in Appalachia, and just the type of person that chooses to live in a place where like the dirt can kill you. It's just, there's a fierce independence and such a tenacity and just sort of a stubbornness that I think, you know, can read as, you know, fatalism. But just the similarities there are really interesting to me, that this sort of rural region where there really isn't any money and it's dangerous to even live there kind of attracts a particular type of person.
And the only piece of that question I'd like to go back to, if it's okay, is you've done such a great job of addressing resiliency. How about redemption? Either of you, both of you.
Well, I've always viewed myself, I do not think I'm a cynical writer, this is where it's so funny. People are amused when I say this. I don't think I'm that dark a writer in some ways, because I really think my characters, and I would say this about Megan's too. I think particularly Chuck and Jolene, they are, William Faulkner had a great quote. He said that he believed most people were a little bit better than their circumstances ought to allow.
Hmm.
And I love that quote. And I mean, Faulkner can be dark, but I think, and certainly, and I can be dark, I know, but I think most of the characters in my books, and I think this is true in Megan's book, they're trying to be a little bit better than their circumstances allow. And I think that's where, but there is darkness there. I mean, these are people who are in dire straits. And those, you know, sometimes people say, well, why do writers always write about, you know, people in trouble? Well, that's when characters revealed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when everything's going well, and you know, you can fake your way through who you are to other people, but when the deal goes down, you know, and you know, you're like one of those loggers in Serena, and you know, this company is essentially waiting for you to, you know, to die. You know, they've got somebody else waiting for you. You kind of get, you know, it kind of puts you in a place where you figure, you know, you better get it right and figure out what you believe and what you don't.
I think redemption is really interesting. I would argue that the whole point of the book is that Jolene didn't need redemption, that she didn't do anything wrong. But you know, Chuck and Rachel are both kind of in need of it, and one of them knows it and one of them doesn't. And I think, you know, in the end, the one that deserves it gets it. But you know, that idea that, yeah, we are always striving, and it's only interesting to read about a character who wants something. And so when that's redemption, it's kind of the ultimate, right?
Right.
And certainly, I would say I have characters who are joyfully unredeemed. Serena, of
Yes.
all,
Yeah.
I think Serena is the great avatar of that in my work. I don't think she's, you know, wanting to go back.
That they're great comments. Thank you so much. Let's go to another really interesting part of the book. Towards the end of the book, Rachel tells Jolene that she can come home if she wants to. And I'm going to read from your book. Jolene says, I have a life here, a daughter, a son, a life where I don't have to worry about whether I'll have somewhere to sleep tonight, a life where I know I'm appreciated and loved unconditionally. I'm not worried that I'll make a mistake and that Charlie or Cash will no longer love me. They won't abandon me. What was important about exploring the themes of motherhood? I know you've touched on your feeling about women. What was important about exploring the themes of motherhood and family throughout the book, as we get into the thick of this part of your book?
Cool. Well, I've come to realize that all of my writing, whether even when it's not obviously about motherhood, is about motherhood. And I don't know whether it's because I sort of came to writing on my writing journey as a result of surviving postpartum depression. But for me, storytelling has really always been a way about trying to understand the world and explore my feelings and my fears. And I have none deeper or realer than as my role as a parent. I have two children. My daughter Brody is 11 and my son Redding is 9. And this story was really born at a overheard conversation when I had these two very young children, and I was having coffee at a coffee shop here in Hendersonville. And this woman behind me was explaining to her partner that she was pregnant, and he was sure it was not his, and he was not going to have anything to do with it. And all I could think about was how much harder her life was going to be. You know, I'm married and I have a partner, and it was still hard to have children, and I can't imagine doing that unsupported. And so you know, as I went down that road, I wanted to explore, you know, a variety of parenting situations, you know, babies, both wanted and unwanted. Raising your siblings' children happens in two different situations in the story. You know, both Rachel and Chuck are raising their sister's child, willingly and unwillingly. And I think it just sort of, you know, I'm kind of stuck on the nature of love and belonging, and it kind of just comes back to being more intention than blood, which is the whole idea of motherhood, is something that I don't seem to be able to get away from.
Thank you so much. Ron, you can address motherhood or family.
Well, I deal with that. I mean, certainly, and I hope in a way that's believable. You know, I have children. You know, I had a mother. I had a sister. So I think you hope you can gain some insight. But once again, that's what I love about literature, is to try to imagine what would it be like to be another person. And I think that's probably a very healthy thing for society. I mean, that's empathy. And so in my work, it's not so much, you know, the characters choose me more than I choose them. And once they come to me, they pretty much are going to reveal themselves. And I hope that they do it in a way that a reader may appreciate. I have my editor is a woman, and I think that's good, probably as far as that. But she seems I don't think she's really ever had a real problem with any of my depictions where she felt like this really doesn't work that well, and maybe so. I mean, that's the idea of imagination. Once again, Hilary Mantel. All that book is from Thomas Cromwell's point of view. You know, this figure in that period, and yet she gets in his head so convincingly. Annie Proulx does the same kind of thing. Annie Proulx writes more about men than women, and yet there's never a moment as a man I doubt her characters, never. And to me, that's part of her greatness, that ability to really convincingly render people other than yourself.
But I think that Ron does that beautifully. I just, you know, I said I've been rereading Serena, and I just read the scene where Rachel and Jacob wake up sick, and she carries him through the night on bare feet to save him from the fever, and I reading so perfect. I mean, that's exactly what parenthood is, right? It's putting yourself last to save your child, and so I think, you know, if you're a good observer and an empathetic person, that you can pretend to be someone else, even if you haven't personally experienced childbirth.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you do that with Chuck. I mean, Chuck is a very, very, you know, there was never a moment where I doubted him, and his motivations, the way, even his perception of women, the way he would look at Jolene. I mean, that attraction and that, you know, those things. So yeah, I mean, writers can do this.
I hope so.
And family seems to be a really important theme from what we're hearing you say in the Appalachia area, and not to stereotype, but an important aspect of life there too. So turning to what we can look forward to from each of you, is there anything that you're currently working on that you would be willing to share with the audience? What's coming up? What can we look forward to?
Well, I have a collection of Grit-Lit short stories coming next summer. It's called Here in the Dark, and there is a story in that collection from Cora, who is Chuck's sister's perspective, and it answers some of the questions that I get asked the most by readers. like, what is in that record case? My agent is currently subbing my second novel. It's called Soft Animals, and it's about 3 generations of women in Oconee County, South Carolina, who just do not know how to be good. And so if you guys could all send me some good vibes, that would be awesome. But my current work in progress is a prequel, actually, to Songbirds. It's Ruby's story, and it takes place in 1942 here in Western North Carolina. And so I was thinking about how Ron was talking about how he keeps writing different stories in different decades, and I guess I keep doing that too. So that's kind of fun.
That's a lot to look forward to.
And it, yeah, I've been a busy girl.
What can we be looking forward to, Ron, from you? You've given us some hints.
Well, I think I'm coming close on a project now. I don't want to. Sometimes I'm a little reluctant to talk much about it, but I'm feeling good about it, and I haven't for a long while. and actually, in the last couple of weeks, it really kind of started to lock into place. So we'll see.
Thank you. That's great. That's exciting. Now, I'm just going to do one wide open question, and we'll turn to some questions from the audience. Is there any aspect, Megan, I'll start with you if that's okay, from the book. Is there any aspect or something that is really important to you, either in the book or that caused you to write as you did and develop the story as you did, that we haven't asked you about? Is there anything that you would like to add to what we've said tonight or ask you?
Well, the only scene that I would love to talk more about in interviews is when Jolene went to the police. And I think that that's something that some people don't understand. But that's and I don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't yet read the book, but she isn't believed, and that's a reality, particularly for women who come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, especially Jolene is white, but especially women of color face that kind of discrimination. And I really think that that's something that we need to be more aware of as a society, that we do not do a good enough job of protecting the weakest among us, those who need us the most. And I would love to change that.
Great point. Thank you so much. Ron, are there aspects of writing as you do in Appalachia that we have not touched on that you'd like to mention to us?
Well, my brother sometimes sends me reviews. I don't like to read them, but he'll read them. And people, he read one where somebody said Rash is implacably grim, and I would like to think that that I capture also the delight in language being used, particularly in humorous ways, and that kind of vividness of expression that I've heard growing up. I mean, my uncle, who was a tobacco farmer up in Watauga County, once told me that a girl didn't have enough clothes on to wad a shotgun. And I waited 3 novels to work that in. So, I think that says something about resiliency too, humor, and my family certainly in the region over the years, my older relatives were always, they could be hilarious too. So it always wasn't grim-faced stoicism.
No, I agree. I just wanted to say, like, the night the new Jesus fell to earth is like laugh out loud funny. Like,
I'm not implacably grim.
No, that's a fantastic, perfectly darkly funny collection.
But I would just like to add how neat it was that each of you went back to resiliency in what you added in that conversation. So So that's great. Why don't we give the audience an opportunity to ask their questions? I think Caitlin is working behind the scenes to put those forward. Caitlin, can we turn that over to you now?
Yeah, we do have some questions, and just another reminder, I know we've got a lot of eager folks here. If you've not yet submitted your question, there's a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. You can ask your question anonymously if you'd like as well. So feel free to submit those while we get started on the couple we've received. So the first question is from Alyssa. How do we write a region in a historical setting when the history we've learned isn't honest or complete, or if it's only conveyed from one perspective? So I think this gets at some of the things you guys have already discussed as well.
Go ahead, Megan.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think it comes down to, you know, what we've kind of discussed before with observation and empathy. And, you know, I guess you could do all the research you can, but there's an awful lot of imagination, right? And sort of looking at people, you know, and figuring out how they would react maybe. But yeah, I guess that's where I start is doing a lot of listening. But then trying to imagine myself or people I know in the shoes of the characters.
Well, I'm not really trying to, in a sense, make really broad generalizations, have a character encompass exactly what what history was. It's about perception of the character. So, I've read my post-structuralist, and I know, and I know that history is a shaky thing, but I think sometimes what I find interesting about historical fiction is that it does allow voices that haven't been heard in fiction. Certainly Toni Morrison has done this with her work. Certainly, a number of writers have. So, but I think sometimes I'm not trying to necessarily be a spokesman for the region. I'm just trying to depict the characters that somehow come into my head as honestly and vividly as I can. And Stephen King once had a great quote. People were complaining about him and about his writing. He said, "I'm trying," and that's all I'm doing. I'm trying, and you hope at least you give a reader reason to read on. And I do think probably the most underrated aspect of writing and reading today is giving pleasure. Reading should be fun too. I mean, well, fun's maybe not the right word, but I think it's a deep pleasure, and I get that. I mean, and that even when I'm reading very dark material, when I read Cormac McCarthy, the beauty of the prose, to me, that's a very pleasing aesthetic experience. And I hope readers don't feel like they're having to, drink a bottle of vinegar when they're reading me. I want there to be insight, and I hope depth, but also the pleasure of reading something well made. You hope it is.
Thank you for those responses. I'll kind of keep going. And the next question is a bit related as to how you guys sort of shape your writing. But Stuart wanted to know, how does y'all's teaching inform your writing?
I mean,
go ahead.
Oh, I think if you teach something, you need to know it maybe a little bit deeper than at least I find that when I'm going to teach a particular aspect, I always learn more about the craft in order to be able to explain it to someone else. So that's always kind of exciting, sort of teaching yourself along with your students. But I mean, also students are an excellent source of ideas for stories, right? They all have fascinating lives, and it's a great place to, mine tidbits. But what were you going to say, Ron?
Well, just that, you know, whenever I start pointing out aspects of problems with my students' writing, I start to realize, well, yeah, I have that same problem on this page I've been working on. I mean, that happens again, but what it does, I mean, that's a really good thing because it makes me think, am I, you know, is this what's not working quite here? Is this something that I can learn from in my work? And I just love being around the enthusiasm of you know, writers who are starting out, and you know, particularly you know, my writers are mainly in the their 20s and early 20s, and just it kind of keeps me young, and it just that delight of sharing something I think is important. James Dickey had a great quote. He said that he was talking about writers, creative writers, even, you know, even if you've never published, but you're a writer. And also if you're a reader, we're keepers of a superior secret. You know, most of the country doesn't really care about anything that's going on in this room, but we do, and we're glad we do, and we feel fortunate that we are able to share it.
Thanks again. So I know we had some questions kind of come to the chat, so I'm going to try and kind of paraphrase a couple of those together. And again, just a reminder, if you do have questions, if you could pop those in the Q&A feature, that would be great. Thank you. So we have a question in the chat from someone who taught both of your books to their students last year, and the students observed a lot of similarities between the two female leads, Jolene and Amy. They're wondering if you could share some thoughts on writing strong female characters.
Well, I think we've addressed that pretty much. I think, Megan, what else would you add to that?
Well, I mean, I think we both talked about how the characters decide that for themselves, right? Like that's not really a decision that I made to make Jolene a strong person. She just is a strong person. But yeah, I mean, I guess there wasn't an intention on my part. I just tried to make her feel real, you know, and so I guess I don't know how you go about intentionally making a strong female character.
Well, you do put them, I mean, they're strong because we put them in situations where they're either going to fold or they're not. And some do in my work fold, not just women, but men too. And yet many of them struggle and strive to, they have to be strong to survive. And there's a little choice. So some don't make it. You know, I think in your book, we see a couple of characters. I don't want to give away much, but Chuck's sister, her situation, we don't know really. Well, I'll just, you know, leave it there.
So really, I guess what you're saying, Ron, is you just throw a lot of shit at them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And if they're a strong character, they'll survive it. And if they're not, they won't.
But all you're doing, you know, is you're trying to be true to life there.
Yeah.
I mean, because we know people I mean, we see people and we have our own struggles, certainly. But we've known people, and I certainly have, who've been in these dire situations, and you hope they're going to make it. But you're just not sure. And that's one thing that's kind of interesting about characters, as far as sometimes knowing that they're going to do something, you don't want them to do it, which including, you know, a character that people got, you know, I got a lot of, not criticism, but why did you let Leonard die? I didn't let him. I wanted him to live too.
Right.
And you know, I love animals, and there was in Eden, I had to have a man kill his horse, and I hated that. I mean, but it had to. I mean, it was an integral part of the price he was going to have to pay.
Absolutely.
So our next question is actually kind of on the same space of writing craft and how you're developing the story. But for your writing practice, do you guys go from outlines or really kind of, as you're saying, let the characters drive the story and the plot? Or do you kind of have it all put together in your head before you even put pen to paper?
When I was writing Songbirds, I was a little bit more of a pantser, you know, that term, by the seat of your pants. But I have over the years since I wrote Songbirds become much more of a planner. I find that it's more efficient, and it helps me with writer's block. And because I'm also a parent and a teacher and that kind of thing, it helps me balance my time better to know where I'm going. And so I usually start with one of those terrible webs, an idea web, and then I write an outline on 3x5 cards so that I can move my scenes around, so that they're not just stuck on paper, because it's nice to be able to move them. But then once I sort of feel like I have the right order, then I can work from there. But it is nice, you know, when you know what's coming, if you get to a scene that you aren't in the headspace to write right now, you know, maybe it's too hard or something, you can skip it and go on to a more lighthearted scene. Not that my work has a lot of lighthearted scenes, but it's nice to have a plan or a map, for me anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think every writer does it differently. For me, I found that every novel I've written started off with an image. Serena, all I had was a woman on horseback, and I knew she was very strong, and I knew someone was watching her with love and fear, and that whole book came out of that. And that's, you know, I wish I could do more like Megan, but I just kind of stumble around, and always about a year in, it just seems absolutely hopeless, and that's when I just have to have faith that if this image is that strong in my head, that the story's there. I'm a Jungian, and I really like that idea that, you know, that I'm just tapping into something, and at least I give myself that belief. It's helpful whenever I'm trying, but that's how it works for me. But I have friends, other writers who do exactly what Megan does. They're, you know, excellent. They do it. Every writer, I think, does it a little different. I know writers, some writers say, I've got to get that last sentence. Truman Capote said, I think John Irving may have said that. He said he knew he had the book, but I think that's why what we want writers to be individual. We want them to find what makes their work unique, and part of that's going to be the process.
I can't tell you how much hope it gives me that Ron Rash feels like his work is a mess at a year.
It always is. Well,
right.
Sometimes it's several years.
There's hope for the rest of us now.
No, believe me, it never gets easier, I can assure you.
I think you guys are inspiring a lot of writers here, just looking at the reactions in the chat too. So knowing in the process y'all go through, I think is helpful and gives other people the courage to try and keep playing with their work. So we have time for one more question, which came through the Q&A. So Tony wanted to know, how do you approach writing stories that have political themes without letting the political drown out the humanity in the story?
Well, I'll just say one thing real quick. I never think about themes when I'm writing. I mean, I never have, you know, gone into a book with a sense, you know, I'm going to write about this particular theme. Now, once again, really good writers do that, but I just kind of what I found is that it's going to come out whether I want it to or not. If I'm, you know, whatever the world I'm entering and what I've been thinking about as far as political or history, you know, whatever is happening, and that doesn't mean the themes aren't in there. They are, and I mean it's something that for me is more organic. It grows out of the characters and out of the place and the time. I mean, obviously, I have some sense of things I'm going to deal with. You know, once I really got into Serena and I realized it was going to be during the Depression, I knew that was going to be dealing with, actually, it was really echoing more what was happening in the United States as far as environmental issues at that time. So I was kind of playing a conversation with the present and the past there. So, and I was aware of, I quickly became aware of that, but it always kind of starts off as kind of a mystery. But, you know, as I say, different writers do it a different way. What about you, Megan?
Well, I think I usually lean towards subtlety, you know, less is more.
Mm.
And I think that there's what's interesting about writing about political themes is the tension between the sides. And so if you can kind of try to represent both sides and use empathy, you know, and in Songbirds there, it's critical of the church, but there are characters on both sides of that issue in the book. Because I mean, while I personally lead in one direction, I didn't think that it was fair for everyone in the book to lean in that direction. And so I think what makes it interesting is being able to explore multiple perspectives and sort of let the reader pull their own thoughts out of you know, out of what you've done. But I think always, you know, even just in my role as an editor at Reckon, you know, I see a lot of stories lately about COVID and about our current political situation, and for like longevity's sake, and it's always maybe better to lean a little bit more subtle that way, so that as long as you need a really good story, and then you can layer in your themes, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the subtlety, or the, you know, in a sense, not feeling like you've got to be heavy-handed, is we're respecting our audience.
Yeah.
You know, we don't need to tell you what to think. You know, I mean, we certainly have our perspectives, but I think when I wrote Saints at the River, I had people again and again say, well, I don't know whose side I was on. I felt like I was on this person's side about damming the river, and then I was on the parents, and I said, great. I mean, they seemed to bother them. I said, well, that's exactly what I hoped. I didn't want to give you that easy answer, or any kind of answer. I think Roth says a writer's not supposed to give the answers. We just kind of bring up the questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll hop on here and just interject quickly. Megan and Ron, do you have websites that you want to direct everyone to go maybe check out your work or see what you're working on next? If you want to share those, Megan, you can go first.
Sure. My website is meganlucas.com, and there's lots of info in my portfolio and everything I've ever written there. But if people want to like actually connect with me, I'm on Twitter. It's just at Megan Lucas with no vowels. That I spend way too much time on Twitter.
And Ron, how can tonight's audience connect with you? Do you have a website you want to share where we can find out what you're working on?
No, I'm in hiding. I'm in a witness protection program right now, and I cannot be reached except under extreme situations. That's a joke. I kind of, you know, that's kind of not my generation. I just kind of, I'm not on Twitter or Facebook or any of it.
You're very smart.
That's my problem, I guess. But anyway, you know, it's a different kind of world for publishing now and for younger writers. But I'm still hiding out up here in the mountains.
All right, well, we'll have to tell everyone to check out their local library, their local independent bookstore for a copy of Ron's books. So I want to thank Megan and Ron for their wonderful conversation this evening, and to Kathy for her excellent moderation. Thank you so much for asking those in-depth, great questions. We want to give a special thanks to Jamie Rogers Southern and Bookmarks for being an event sponsor. So please go check them out and head to that awesome literary festival in September. And thanks so much for all of your interaction with us this evening. Please visit our website at www.nchumanities.org to learn more about other upcoming events and to subscribe to our email newsletter to stay up to date with all NC Humanities news and programs. We want to thank everyone again for attending this evening and hope that you all had a great evening. So thanks everyone and have a good evening.